Let's talk about Sam Zell. He was a legendary, often pretty controversial billionaire investor. He built an entire empire by making these incredibly audacious deals, and he earned a nickname that just perfectly captures his whole strategy. They called him the Grave Dancer.
$39 billion. I mean, just think about that number for a second. Back in 2007, this was the single largest real estate deal in history, and it was the moment that would define Sam Zell's entire career. But here's the thing. It wasn't just a simple sale. It was an all-out war.
You see, this deal wasn't really about the money. It was a high-stakes showdown between two of the biggest titans in finance. On one side, you had the private equity king, Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone, and on the other, you had Sam Zell, fighting over the fate of his life's work, a company called Equity Office Properties.
So here was the conflict. Steve Schwarzman looked at Zell's company and basically saw a pile of parts he could sell. His plan was simple and pretty ruthless. Buy the company, break it up, and sell everything off for a quick, massive profit. But there was another bidder, Vernado, who offered to buy the company and keep the empire Zell had spent a lifetime building completely intact. So that's the big question, right? Who was this guy at the center of it all? Who built something so huge that the biggest names on Wall Street literally go to war over it? To really understand him and the choices he made, we've got to go back, way back to the beginning.
Yeah, Sam Zell's story, it doesn't start in some fancy Ivy League classroom or on a Wall Street trading floor. Nope. It starts with a desperate, last-minute escape from the jaws of history.
His father saw the writing on the wall back in Poland, and he managed to get his family out on the very last train before the Nazi invasion. They made it to America with pretty much nothing. Now, you'd think that kind of harrowing escape would make you deeply risk-averse, right? Well, it did for his parents. But for Sam, it had the exact opposite effect. It taught him how to be a calculated, almost fearless risk-taker.
And this instinct, it showed up early. I mean, really early. At just 12 years old, he found his first big opportunity, buying Playboy magazines in the city for 50 cents apiece and then selling them back in his suburban neighborhood for $3. And this little venture taught him the single most important lesson of his entire career.
And that's it. That's the bedrock of his whole philosophy. He saw an unlimited demand from the kids in his neighborhood and a basically non-existent supply. He realized that the space between those two things, that was pure profit. This one simple concept would end up making him billions.
So he took that philosophy and started applying it to real estate while he was still in college. But a run-in with the law and a spectacular market crash, well, those were the events that would really forge his reputation and earn him that famous nickname.
Can you imagine getting indicted by the IRS? It must have been terrifying. And even though the charges were eventually dropped, the experience left a huge mark on him. It lit this fire under him to build a business so big, so powerful, that he would never ever be vulnerable like that again.
And this next move, this is what earned him the moniker. It's the mid-70s, and the real estate market is on fire. I mean, it's a frenzy. Everyone is buying, prices are just soaring. But Sam Zell, he does the unthinkable. He stops buying completely. He saw what nobody else wanted to see. He saw that the market was totally oversupplied and overbuilt. He just knew the party had to end. So he waited. He had the conviction to go against the entire industry. And when that inevitable crash finally came, he was one of the only people left standing with a pile of cash.
So while everyone else was going bankrupt, Zell went on an epic buying spree. Between 1974 and 1977, he just scooped up about $4 billion in distressed properties, often for pennies on the dollar, sometimes for just a single dollar down. He was literally dancing on the graves of failed projects, and it made him an absolute fortune. So then Zell has this light bulb moment. He realizes his whole grave dancer thing, finding assets where supply is low and distress is high, it doesn't just apply to buildings. It can apply to entire companies. And this was the era of the corporate raiders, and Zell was about to become one of its masters. His turnaround of this company, Idle, was just a masterclass. He saw value where everybody else just saw bankruptcy. He looked past the balance sheet and saw its physical assets, like rail cars. So he took control, he cut all the fat, and then, in a classic Zell move, he anticipated a coming shortage of real cars. He bet big, and it paid off spectacularly.
And that brings us right back to 2007. He's armed with decades of success, he has this legendary reputation, and Zell is facing two massive deals. One was going to be his crowning achievement, the other, a humbling and very, very public failure.
In the end, he chose Blackstone's huge all-cash offer.
It was a deal that made a fortune for his shareholders and obviously for himself, but it meant dismantling the very empire he'd spent his life building. He saw the peak of the market, and just like he did back in the 70s, he got out at the perfect time.
But at the very same time, he made another enormous bet. He bought the Tribune Company, thinking he could apply his turnaround magic to the struggling media industry. But this wasn't just a cyclical downturn like real estate. This was a fundamental technology-driven collapse of an entire business model. And his timing? Oh, it could not have been worse.
The 2008 financial crisis hits almost immediately after he buys it, which just accelerated the collapse of advertising revenue. The company plunged into bankruptcy, and that number right there, that was Zell's personal loss. For a man who so rarely lost, this was a massive public failure, where his philosophy ran into a problem it just couldn't solve.
And yet, here's the crazy part. Even after losing a fortune, he stood by his decision. Why? Because for him, it was never just about the risk. It was about the risk versus the potential reward. He lost $300 million, sure, but if he had won, he stood to make $5 billion. For him, that was a game worth playing every single time.
So, after a roller coaster career of these epic wins and spectacular failures, what can we really take away from it all? What was the core philosophy that drove this guy?
Well, it all came down to a few core rules. For Zell, business was a game, and money was just how you kept score. The real thrill was just the achievement of winning. His whole strategy rested on deeply understanding supply and demand better than anyone else. That allowed him to assess the risk-reward ratio, not just the risk, which gave him the conviction to go against the entire world. And finally, he created an environment where the best people wanted to keep playing the game right there with him.
And that's really the ultimate question Sam Zell's career leaves us with, isn't it? In our age of algorithms and complex data models, does the ultimate key to success still just belong to the street-smart hustler with a gut feel for what people want and what they don't have?